Everybody. Thanks for tuning into our virtual event this afternoon. We are delighted to have Steve Berry and Grant Blackwood with us. They're going to be talking about their brand new book called Red Star Falling. And we have copies here that are signed by both gentlemen. And I'll put a link in the comments field if you'd like to purchase one of those. And what else can we say, Barbara? If you have questions for Steve or Grant, go ahead and put them in the comments or chat feature on YouTube or Facebook, and I'd be happy to ask any questions that you might have. And there are some folks who may have received the wrong link to this event, a Zoom link. So if you got that and I kicked you off the meeting, don't take it personally. You can watch the event on Facebook or on YouTube. And so, Barbara, other than that, over to you.
Thank you, Patrick. Well, first of all, I'm going to drink a toast to our two authors because today is publication day, and this is your virtual book launch, guys. So many congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you. We appreciate it.
And so this is the second in 3 books about Luke Daniels. And those of you who are Steve Berry fans know that History Matters is a big part of Steve and his work, whether it's Cotton Malone or other novels. But in this one, in a way, you're kind of chasing current history. And I'm going to refer to page 18, where you're talking about the Ukraine. Most Western intelligence agencies believe that Franco, a substitute name for Vladimir Putin, has ambitions for reclaiming a huge chunk of the former Soviet Union, which is now all sovereign neighboring territory. That means war, since NATO will never accept any of that, and rightly so. Franco is testing NATO's resolve to see who blinks first. I think that really sums up what's going on in a major way. And so in many ways, this book is you're taking a look at what's happening at the moment as well as in the past.
Just a little bit to the moment. We were careful in the book not to actually have a war in Ukraine. We had aggressions in Ukraine because we didn't know what was going to happen. We wrote this book a year ago now.
Right.
We didn't know what was going to happen here. So we were very careful how we couched that. But we clearly have an aggressive Russia that is moving out onto their neighbors. And we have an unlikely person trying to stop it. And so that's what makes this novel a little bit interesting.
Well, I agree with you, but I do think that it is an attempt by Putin on 2 levels. One, to reclaim former USSR republics that left, but also second, I recently read a book by Graham Moore called Wealth of Shadows, which talks about the economics behind the Nazi war machine, how Germany rose from its financial disaster after World War I. And basically a wartime economy, is a thriving economy. And I think that's part of what Putin is doing too. So
it definitely does. The problem with the Russian economy is the same problem they had with the Soviet economy. You see, when we in America have a defense buildup, that money comes out of taxes. It goes to the private sector. The private sector hires people. The private sector builds things, does all that. Russia doesn't really do it that way. That's not the way they do things. The money kind of stays in-house. Everything kind of stays in-house. So they don't have the means to maintain what they have. And I think we're seeing that in Ukraine very clearly now, that they don't have the means to make things happen. We explore a little bit of that in the novel too.
You do. And, I kept waiting all the way through for Franco to meet. This is a bit of a spoiler, but since you can't really take down Russia and the president, you have to take down other players, right?
Yeah, and there's, as I said, this is about a Soviet nuclear weapon in orbit, and there's a persistent legend that the Soviets did launch something into orbit in the late 80s, early 90s. No one knows for sure whether that happened. Did it burn up? Did it go up? Did it go up even at all? Nobody knows. We put it up there, and when we put it up there, we decided what to do with it. What do we do with it? And we came up with a surprising twist, and that's the twist in the novel that we can't speak of, but there's a surprise in the novel that you go like, oh, I thought this was going to be something else. No, it's really this. So that's what made this book a little bit fun.
It is fun. So, Grant, tell us about Luke Daniels. You signed on to write 3 books with Steve?
So Luke Daniels is, and I think I get this right, Luke Daniels appeared initially in the Lincoln Myth, and he came on board Magellan Billet as a new agent, headstrong, fresh from being an Army Ranger deployed in Afghanistan, and he fell under the the tutelage of Cotton Malone, who he refers to as Pappy. They have kind of a really rocky start on a speedboat. I think in the Black Sea, wasn't it, Steve, where they
No, in
meet?
the sea off of Copenhagen.
That's right. But Luke starts out very headstrong and very action oriented, and through these books, and I think as he's appeared in the Malone series, he's kind of grown, and you really see that in the Ninth Man and Red Star Falling. He grows and he changes, and that's been interesting to follow.
So, what was the reason, Steve, that you wanted to write a separate series about Luke Daniels? Just more stories than you could tell?
Correct. Yeah, I do. I had stories I wanted to tell. I wanted to develop his character separate from Cotton. I wanted him to grow and mature separate from Cotton. And he's a fun character. And I pitched it to Grand Central, and they said, yes, let's do it.
Oh, wonderful. So you talk about it being a trilogy, but we'll find out just how far it will go. That'll be
But we don't. Yeah, we don't know. They said, let's do 3 and see where we are, and then we'll make a decision on that.
right. Well, anyway, it's great to have Grant back because we met Grant during other authors and other series, and we've missed him. So it's great to see him again. What is it that you would like to say about the book in kind of a pitch?
Oh, well, the book deals with 3 elements. As I mentioned, it deals with the legend of the Soviet nuclear weapon in orbit. It also deals with the question of the lost library of Ivan the Terrible. This is a rare collection of books that disappeared 500 years ago that's never been seen since. And we found a way to incorporate the library into this quest. So it came together. And the third element it deals with is Russia. It deals with Russia physically and politically, but mainly physically, because this is a travelogue of Russia. We go all across Russia in some very unique places. Grant created those. Maybe Grant, you could speak to those. Those were your selections.
You know, I think we kind of start in Ukraine, and they finally get into Russia. They have to sneak into Russia. Luke and his sidekick Danielle, who doesn't get along with really well in the beginning. Once they find themselves in Russia, they travel to some amazing places. Russia's vastness is hard to overestimate, but they end up in a place that Steve and I didn't even know existed up in the White Sea. It's a tiny island that used to be a gulag. It was renowned for its inmates not surviving very long. So Luke starts there and he ends up all the way over to the east near Lake Baikal. But Russia is a very rural place, lots of connection to history. So we had tons of places we could choose from.
Well, you really did. Actually, it's fun everybody has a phone. It's fun to Google a lot of the places that you read about. Now, interestingly enough, for various reasons, and before all this started, I've been to a lot of the places that you write about, including astonishingly Murmansk and Archangel, on a cruise that went up. For those who have actually looked at a map, Norway, Sweden, and Finland stop short of the top of the landmass, but Norway goes up and then it curls around. And shortly before Murmansk, you can get there. So there are cruise ships, so there were before all this, that actually would go up to Longyearbyen and then continue over around Norway and land in Murmansk, which I have to tell you was not my favorite place to ever visit. But there's a huge amount of coastline of Russia along the top of the world that are coming into play more now that we have global warming. They're not completely ice-locked. And so it was really fun to go up there. But to get to Russia in the first place, you went through Hungary, right? You went to Budapest and then you went sort of northeast towards the Ukraine.
Yeah, that was Grant. That was yours. What was?
So this all starts. Red Star Falling starts with Luke picking up a mission that he went on with John Vince, one of the characters, 2 years earlier, and that mission went wrong. And they had staged this CIA intelligence gathering operation in Hungary so they could slip across the border into Ukraine. And so that's where Luke starts, is back where it kind of all went wrong. And he picks up the lead to where John Vince is in Hungary, and then up through Ukraine, and then into Russia proper.
So is what he's doing looking, he's got intelligence that maybe John is still alive and he's hoping to rescue him? What's the reason he's doing this?
That's exactly right. Some information comes that Vince is still alive, and he wants Luke, and he wants to tell Luke some information, something that he will only tell to Luke. And Luke feels bad because he left him behind, and he's, he didn't have a choice, but he did. He wants to go back. He wants to right that wrong. So he goes back in, but then he gets hooked up with Danielle Ortega, and she has her own agenda. And she's very much like Luke was in the beginning with Cotton Malone. She's impetuous. She's headstrong. She takes necessary risks. She can be foolish sometimes. This is all Luke, what he was when he first got going. And now he's on the other side. He's the voice of reason. He's the voice of patience. So it was fun to switch it around because as I said, we wanted Luke to evolve. It was always my dream that the Cotton Malone books would be action, history, secrets, conspiracies. The Luke books would be action, secrets, conspiracies, and a little bit of history, just a little bit. I wanted it to more be fun, more be action adventure, more be Cussler-like in the books, a little bit more Cussler-like in those books. So this book did that. This book began to fulfill that.
I love it, Cussler. Like I always call it the Cussler verse. I'm still deeply immersed into it. So I'm glad that it kept going. And you're right, it's a form of storytelling, adventure storytelling, I think of it. I mean, they're thrillers, but if there's one thing Clive had, it was this amazing sense of adventure that he infused. I mean, he did a lot of it himself, which I've always thought. We did an 80th birthday party for Clive, and people, his family contributed videos and photos and stuff of a younger Clive. And he actually, I mean, I wouldn't say he was an action hero in the sense that he, worked for Black Ops or CIA or something, but he actually did do quite a lot of the stuff that he writes about. So have you guys thought about that, getting out in the field and actually attempting any of this?
Well, we go out in the field. I've been to Russia twice, and Grant's been there once. So we get out to see the area. I haven't been quite as adventurous as Clive, going underwater and doing all the things that he once did. But I do go out and research them, and I go firsthand to places. Yes.
So one of the things I really liked about the book are the older Russian characters, the former president of Russia, and I don't know exactly what we call the other guy, but you show us a lot of Russia really from sort of the Gorbachev, the standpoint. And I thought that they were fascinating. Was that you together creating them, or one of you suggested them?
We did. We created them together, and we wanted them to play off of one another. We wanted them to be two sides to the same coin, and they were. And it always fascinated me what would have happened if Gorbachev had have been a little more aggressive or a little more involved. What would have happened? Could he have stepped in? But of course, he didn't have Red Star, which our guy has. So it changes everything, and it makes for an interesting story. It also made for another interesting twist at the very end of the novel. There's two twists at the end of the novel, and it also helped us make that twist come possible too.
So do you think, both of you having written this book and traveled to Russia and so forth, that the Russians really have, I mean, they seem to long for authoritarian government, but then that's really almost all they've ever known.
That's all they've ever had. They love it. If a totalitarian government is going to exist, Russia is one place on the planet where it can. They've been dominated. They were dominated by the Tatars. They were dominated by the Mongols. They were dominated by the czars, and they were dominated by the communists. The concept of democracy is totally foreign to the Russians and will never be in their blood. It's just not their way. So totalitarianism has a home there, no question about it.
I think, yeah, you're absolutely right. I can remember because we spent a week in St. Petersburg as friends of the Hermitage, the museum. And I chose to go in December because I thought we were going to, go back to Russia for another chance to St. Petersburg. We should go in December. And at some point or other, there was a group of older people, and they were evincing real nostalgia for Stalin, for the days because there was a certainty to it, that they were more or less told what to do and how to live, and they, personal freedom didn't appear to be anything that they relished having.
They would give up their freedom for order, and they always have. And it's just not. It's an interesting. It's a different philosophy. I got a big kick out of listening to news saying we're going to bring democracy to Russia. No,
Yeah.
you're not going to bring democracy to Russia. It's not going to happen.
No, I don't think so either. And I think, there's always been, I mean, from before Peter the Great, way back to the Tartars and so forth, there's always been this quest for expansion, especially west. So,
Which is amazing because the damn country's huge. I mean, they want more territory. It's huge as it is.
it truly is. But I'm wondering if climate change may alter things slightly, in the sense that, so much of it was frozen forever. And you couldn't do much with it. And I'm wondering, is shipping beginning to root itself over the top of the world rather than coming down, going through the canals and so forth, whether maybe their focus might shift a bit? That's not part of your book, but it's just an interesting question.
Did you come across any of that, Grant, in the research?
I didn't, and I didn't get too far into it. I imagine it certainly could happen, but I didn't come across any research that pertained to the book. And I often, if I let myself get off track on those kind of interesting things, I go way down a rabbit hole. So I try to rein myself in.
Right. Well, I mean, I mean, there are even things like, for all this talk about Putin loosening a nuclear arsenal and all the rest of it, has he really stopped to think that the winds blow east? And how would China and Korea feel if he decides to detonate all this stuff, because it's going to blow their way? That's just the wind pattern. So I'm fascinated with the fact that he's been able to sort of bluff everybody so far. Although, what if he's right and he can do it? Does anybody want to take that risk?
That's a good question.
Well, it's the question that sort of comes up in the book.
Yes, and in our book, we have a counter element that comes into play, which does not exist in real life.
True enough. So when you talk about Grant, what is your role here? Do you do a lot of research? How do you write together? People always want to know, when there's two writers involved, how you work together. So from your standpoint, how's it go?
Steve and I talked at the beginning, and he was very clear about what we were going to do. We'd flesh out the idea and get enough of a skeleton for the story that we were comfortable with it. And then he kind of gave me free rein to go where I want to go. There are a lot of times we go back and forth in certain elements, so I would go down the right track. But once I get a good solid draft, I send it to Steve, and he puts his stamp on it. And that's kind of the way we knew it was going to work, and I think it's worked wonderfully. The end of the book kind of gets the Steve Berry voice to it, and he knows Luke better than I do, so it comes out to be a great product, I think.
Yeah, Grant does the first draft, and then I rewrite that draft to put it into my voice and make sure the characterization is right. I told Grant early on, don't worry about trying to get my voice. Don't worry about trying to get all the characters exactly right. Just do it, and I'll fix that. And so, I take about 4 to 6 weeks after he sends it to me, and I rewrite the draft and put it into my voice and mind. So it works out very well. It's a true collaborative effort, yes.
So you're not actually looking to write a third voice. You're looking to write the Steve Berry voice.
Correct. It has to be in my voice. So I take the draft, and he sent it to me. And then I took about, 6 weeks, and I rewrote the book. And what I mean by rewrite the book, I'm putting it into my voice. I'm just fixing everything so it sounds like me. And it is me. And then if there's things that need correcting, I correct it. If there's characterization that needs fleshing out, or if there's things I know about Luke that he doesn't, I add them in. So it's a true collaborative effort to come up with the finished product.
So when you talk about putting it in your voice, are you talking dialogue? Are you talking description? Are you talking everything?
All of it, all of it. Yeah, I have a particular way I do my dialogue. I told Grant going in, don't worry about that. I'll fix it when you send it. Just do it your way. I'll fix it when it comes. I'm a very big believer in oblique dialogue. I don't do a lot of direct questions and answers. Everything is kind of a little bit oblique in some ways. I like oblique dialogue better, so I fixed that. And then I added characterization of Luke. I have to flesh him out more because Grant knows a lot about him, but I know everything about him. So I can fix him however I want to do it. I know little things he doesn't know, and I can throw them in there. And then I fixed the voice. And there was a couple of situations. We did have something in the early on in one of the first book, and it fixed it this time. Grant likes to kill a lot of people. He's into killing people, and so there was a little too much killing.
I don't like personally killing people.
Yeah. There's a little too much killing going on, and I said, Grant, we don't have a lot of that. We have some in the books, but not a lot of that. So we had to taper back on the killing.
Yep.
So no high body count for you, huh?
No, I don't like that. We had a big shootout scene in The Ninth Man, and that was unavoidable. In this book, we really don't have that. We have shooting, but not a lot of death. No.
Well, one thing you did do, and I'm conscious of it because when Senator McCain was dying from it, those of us at Arizona were treated to a lot of information about glioblastoma. You do reveal early on, so this is not a spoiler, that the former president of Russia, was in his 90s, I think.
Yes.
Right? Is suffering from a glioblastoma. In other words, he's really under a death sentence, might be 4 months, might be 6, could be whatever. So which one of you, because you describe it very realistically, which one of you really dug into what it would be like to get that diagnosis?
I think Grant did that. We just said we wanted him to have something wrong with his brain, and Grant came up with the way to do that.
Yeah, I think we went back and forth on how it would play on the page, but I chose that particular disease because it's ugly. And there's no coming back from it. And we knew that this character needed a ticking clock to be on him. For him to accomplish what he thought was necessary for Russia, he had to have little time remaining. But it was hard sometimes to play it out on the page because it gets pretty real, that disease.
It is an ugly disease. I was interested that one of my alma maters, Northwestern University, has got a very active glioblastoma research and surgical thing and all the rest of it. One of the alumni magazines described that they thought they were actually going to make progress in attempting to treat it. And I think you mentioned in the book that one of the principal difficulties with it is that it's so hard to diagnose. By the time it is diagnosed, it's usually too late to do anything with it. So, I think any of us getting older, is it a disease, Grant, that when you were researching it, is it more a disease of the aging, or can it strike anybody?
I didn't see that it was a disease of the aging. I think it may happen in older populations, but I don't know if there's anything inherent with geriatric medicine, not that I caught on.
I'm not sure either. Right. So Dan, when you bring in a new character, Steve, is that something that Grant can bring in and then you kind of refine it? I mean, you don't know everything about everybody in the book, presumably.
No, we plot the book together and we lay out the point of view characters. We agree on who the point of view characters are going to be, and we knew in this case, who they would be. And so those are not a real surprise. Now, if Grant then has free reign. If he thinks they're not working, we can get rid of one. I don't put any handcuffs on him at all. I basically just say, here's my ideas. Here's what we've come up with. Take it and go. If it doesn't work, don't do it. Do what you got to do to make it work. If I get it back and I read it and it doesn't feel like it's working, then I'll change it. Neither one of us get married to our words, which is pretty good. We don't get that attached to them. So we're pretty flexible in changing things up because we want to get the best product we can, and we want to make sure that it all makes sense. And it's tricky when you have two writers writing it, particularly when you're appealing to one writer's audience. So it's really up to me to make sure that book is going to be okay with my readers. That's my job.
And I think it really helps that Steve and I, we look at thrillers, well, genre fiction in general, but thrillers especially in one way. And readers pick up thrillers to be entertained. And so that's what we're always aiming at. And if we're getting that job done, whether Steve is making that more entertaining or I am or whatever, that's job one. And I think having that in front of our mind is always a good thing.
Mhm.
Well, I don't disagree with you that people read thrillers for entertainment. I mean, that's why they're called thrillers. But I also think that Steve's audience really likes the history, the information that is contained. I mean, one of the reasons I like crime fiction better than other forms of fiction, I'm not just talking thrillers, is generally you get to learn something. If the author is doing a good job, you get to pick up all kinds of information. I, for example, would have known when there was a woman in Scottsdale who killed her husband and couldn't figure out how to get rid of the body parts and put them in a dumpster. I happen to know from reading forensic mysteries that she could have accomplished all that using Tide and some other ingredients, has saved herself, from all that. But there's just so much cool stuff that you can learn in a good crime novel and a good thriller.
Same with the thriller. We want to inform as well. And this book, you're going to learn a lot in this book about a variety of different subjects that come up to play. Some very interesting things about the Russian space program, some interesting things about the lost library of Ivan the Terrible, about Ivan the Terrible himself. There's a lot of really cool little pieces of information in here that you pick up on while you're getting entertained. The trick is to mix entertainment with information. Action with information. That's the trick in our genre. And when Grant gives it to me, I look at it, and if I think we've got a little too much of one and too little of the other, I make adjustments to it. Then when we're both done, Elizabeth, my wife, reads it, and she's the final say to see if we got it all mixed together correctly. And she lets us know if we got a little too much or a little too little of each one.
I really like your psychological portrait of Ivan the Terrible. I mean, is there much in the historical record to support it, or did
Yeah,
it just...
we took that right from the record. He was a tough guy. Now but terrible, you have to understand, didn't have the connotation that we use with that word. It really meant feared. Terrible meant feared.
Yeah,
and the czars wanted to be feared. Now, Ivan's the first man to ever be called the czar of all of Russia. He created that phrase, and he ruled with an iron fist, as czars did. But he had some problems. I mean, he killed his son. He killed his own son in anger. He had some anger issues. He had some mental health issues. But he was also a very wise and dedicated ruler who took Russia to another level, took it up to another level. So we wanted to explore all of that, and all of that is true to history, yes.
So you have a writer's note in the back, which is fun. Is that a place where you can kind of flesh out some of the stuff in the book with real facts?
That's what we do. And the writer's note tells you what's true or false and fills in the gaps. Just don't read it first. It will give away the whole novel. But it is there to fill in the gaps. And so we can let the reader know where we played games or where we didn't play games. We want you to know.
Right. So if you were, more in the past, this book is in the past, but also largely in the present. Do you ever find, that you have to bend actual history in order to make it work better for the thriller, and then you explain it later?
What you say about that, Grant? You had to do that.
Well, yeah, I mean, it happens. We try to stick. One, authenticity is important, but I think it was Elmore Leonard who said, "Never let a fact get in the way of a good story." And I think we're both of the same mind as we try to be as factual and authentic as possible. But if we have to tweak things a little bit to make it entertaining, we'll do that.
I don't think readers are super critical. If you, alter dates or whatever it all is. I do want to encourage those of you who are going to read Red Star Falling seriously to use your phone to sort of map it out. You can start with Hungary. I love the way you describe it. You're right. It's a great big plane that looks like Montana. But you can, go to Budapest, take the highway, get to the small town, which was, kind of the entry point. follow it into the Ukraine. But then really, it's very interesting to explore the top of Russia, which
Yeah, we wanted a map in the book of Russia to show all the places, but publishing houses don't have artists anymore. So they have no one who can draw those maps anymore. So we couldn't get one to put in there. So it would have been cool to have a map in there to show where everything was.
well, I think it would be, but I also think today, when everybody does have a phone with a Google feature, that maybe it's not a disaster not to have a map. Also, the great thing about Google Maps is you can expand them and contract them. So, you can zero in and get information. I was surprised at how warm it is in those two places, Grant. When I was looking up, it's as high as 54 today in Murmansk. Yay. So
Yeah, that's a heat wave there sometimes.
it really is. Years and years ago, Robert Harris wrote a thriller, the name of which I can never remember, which I think
Archangel,
was
Archangel.
Archangel. It was
Mhm.
Archangel. Okay. And Archangel is east and south of Murmansk. It's on the other side of the White Sea on that peninsula thing over there. But when he wrote it, it was so exotic, that it was unlikely that people could easily get there and all the rest of it. And what was it, Steve? Maybe 20 years ago? It's been a
Yeah,
while.
it's a while back. I would love to go visit all the places that we wrote about in the White Sea area one day when that things calm down and it opens back up because they sounded quite intriguing. And we did it all from books and from pictures and photographs and things. But I would love to go and actually see some of that stuff.
I can tell you from personal experience, it was 96 when we were in Murmansk, which I will tell you, Murmansk is totally not prepared for. And the thing I remember most, aside from the fact that they had kind of a small, dusty museum where it was probably 106 because there was no ventilation, was the cemeteries. They had very large cemeteries for the dead of World War II, and they had them grouped by nation. So there was a French cemetery and an American cemetery and a Russian cemetery and so forth. And I think up until that moment, I hadn't really thought about the war dead from the Second World War in North Russia. And it just emphasized that it really was a world war, the scope of it, that you would visit cemeteries in Murmansk where soldiers had fallen from all these different nations. But otherwise, I didn't think Murmansk had anything to recommend it. But I would love to see Archangel again. But what I really loved years ago was going around the Black Sea. Before it was in 2011. It was before Russia, I think, invaded the Crimea, if I recall, because we went to Odessa and Sebastopol and all the rest of it. And it was so beautiful and so peaceful. And it just makes me realize, in such a short time, how the world can change. And that's always kind of been true around Russia. If you ever spend any time in the Baltic and you look at the alliances between, Finland, Sweden, Norway, Russia, it was like a rotating thing, where two of them would line up and the other one would be the enemy and on and on. It seems like history is turning even faster though today. Do you feel like that?
The world's changing. It's changing so quickly, and you gotta keep up with it. And that's why we have to be careful when we write these books not to get quite too topical because the world changes. When we wrote this book a year ago, we had no idea what was going to be happening right now. And the war could have been over, the war could have been finished. We didn't have any idea. So we have to be very, very careful. That's why I don't get quite that topically and timely.
Right.
But in this case, we got away with it.
Well, yeah, I think currently we're in kind of a stalemate where everybody's grinding along. So yeah, your book feels right on point. What are you working on next? If you got book 3 going already?
We do have book 3 going.
Ooh.
It's going to be a very interesting story. It deals with one of my favorite people of all time. Deals with Walt Disney. So Luke Daniels and Walt Disney are going to be together.
Wow. And the mouse, is this going to be the mouse as
Not
well?
the mouse necessarily, but what happened was Walt made a trip to South America in 1938, I believe it was. He was sent down there on a goodwill tour to just check out South America, and they loved him down there, and he wanted to go down. They wanted to just make him happy. But while you're there, could you just keep an eye on and see what's going on with the Nazis down there? What's the influence there? What's the attitude there? What do people think about that? Could you just kind of keep your ears open? This is true. This is all true. And we've written a modern day thriller that spins out of that trip to South America.
You know, it's an interesting question about where was South America during World War II.
It was.
Um,
It was
it-
more leaning towards the Nazis were in Argentina. They're very much very strong in Argentina. The Americans tried to keep control of Brazil. The Nazis were in Paraguay, Uruguay. Chile remained kind of neutral, but they tried very hard. The Nazis did to make inroads down there. We tried very hard to cut them off. And but South America did play a role. Now, after the war, it played a huge role
yeah.
because that's where the Germans fled to. And I dealt with that in The Last Kingdom, a Cotton Malone thriller.
Right.
This time, though, we're going to deal with something with Disney, something comes current, where Walt and Roy both come into play in the novel. And Luke gets caught up in an adventure that starts with Walt Disney. So I've been wanting to do that for a long time. Grant is working on the draft right now. We should have it done shortly.
It sounds wonderful. I recently read a book, Grant, in which the Nazis were buying all kinds of cotton from Brazil, kind of anticipation of more stuff for the war. And anyway, there was an effort to disrupt the cotton trade. It reminded me of the Civil War when the British, were buying all the cotton from the South, and the North wanted to disrupt that because there was money involved and strategy and so forth. But I hadn't really thought about Brazil as a major exporter of cotton. Had you found that to be true?
There's all these tiny mini stories behind big stories. You find that in Civil War, World War One. I hadn't heard that, but there's all these tiny stories that make the bigger picture. For example, in World War II, how big a deal ball bearings were to the Germans. Everything ran in ball bearings, and that's why we and the Brits bombed so many ball bearing factories, is because they played such a huge role. But nobody thinks about those tiny details, and they're everywhere, just like the cotton you mentioned.
Well, I would have thought Brazil would have been about rubber, but then, if we remember, the British the British were real pirates. They sent that exhibition up, to Manaus to steal pods from the rubber tree, brought it back to Kew Garden, and eventually transplanted it to Malaysia. So I don't know that Brazil was actually a major exporter of Russia by the time the war started. I think more of the rubber was coming from the Far East. So the Japanese were, it's amazing how, economics, how much do you both feel that economics are the central driver of war?
Well, it's certainly no question a driver of it, but power drives it more than anything. We're wanting more power, greed, power, but economics does have something to do with it. Now, in World War II, it was particularly important because they had to keep the war machine going. So they had to feed the war machine. And once you're in a war, you got to have stuff. You got to have stuff. You got to keep the machine fed. And so they had to get this stuff from all over the world. South America offered them a way to do that. Americans were down there, though. We were countering everything they were doing, trying to counter it all. There was a huge amount of it going on. There was a big series of books that was written by a gentleman. I forgot his name. He's deceased now. He wrote a lot of war. He wrote a whole series of books set in Argentina during the war. He lived in Alabama. His son writes the books now.
Hmm.
Um,
You talking about W.E.B. Griffith or whatever?
yeah, that's exactly right. That's him.
Okay.
Yeah, he wrote a whole series of books with a character set in World War II in South America that explored all this in fiction wise. And I read those. They were very interesting.
Right. Well, South America had a wealth of, raw material
It did.
to supply things. So I have read several places, and I'm sure you have too, that, the next major war may be fought over water more than anything else, since water is a diminishing resource. Rob reminded me the other day to reread the Milagro Beanfield War. In fact, I'm trying to think whether maybe the author died recently. I can't remember why it all came up, but here in Arizona, this is a central problem. We have communities even now fighting over water rights. So, not much we can do to fix it here, but I do think that it comes down to resources, doesn't it? What is it that you need to feed the war machine or gain power or,
I think you may be right. Water may be the next rare resource, yes.
right. Be good for the Custer people, won't it?
Oh, yeah, they love it, wouldn't they? That's just what we wrote about.
Indeed. So, Patrick, maybe the audience would like to ask questions about the book. We can't say much more because there's spoilers lurking in our every conversation.
Have to be careful.
Let's see. Yeah, we have lots of people tuned in. And Barbara, you mentioned the Milagro Beanfield War. Yeah, what a great book.
Truly.
John Nichols was the author, and he did just pass away this last year.
Okay, I thought that might be the reason. For those of you who haven't read it, I really highly recommend it. It's set in New Mexico, and it really does illustrate how a relatively rare resource can lead to war.
And the film that Robert Redford made was great. It was a really fun adaptation. Let's see. Okay. Okay, Paulette says, let's see, wait, I just lost it. I'm sorry, folks. Oh yeah, she asks, Steve, will you have a tour to Russia? And do you miss our beach?
She's referring to the Palm Coast, where we had a place there for many years. I do miss the beach. I used to go down there quite a bit. I plotted a lot of novels walking on the beach at Palm Coast, but we don't have that place any longer down there. That's where Paulette lives. I don't think we'll do a tour to Russia anytime soon, no, because you can't go there. You can't go there. So I don't see Russian travel opening back up anytime in the in the next years. It'd be years before it would happen again. It's basically illegal for Americans to go to Russia now.
And in fact, even before all the war started and everything, if you wanted to go to Russia, the visa applications went all the way back to your life in junior high school. They were really tough to fill out. Did you have to do that, Steve, when you went?
I did it. I did it one time. I went on a cruise, so I did not have to do it. But the first time I went, I did have to do it. Yes.
What's the publishing industry like, if any, in Russia? Are there a lot of sort of bootlegged copies of popular American novels, or?
Well, that's all there is. In fact, no one sells the rights to Russia. Russia publishers don't buy the rights to books. They just steal them. There's no copyright laws there. So they just steal them. I had a couple of novels early on sold to Russia, but hasn't had one sold there in 20 years. They don't worry about that. They just publish what they want when they want and just steal it.
Valerie asks, any update on Grant's solo projects?
What about that, Grant?
Right now I'm concentrating on finishing book 3 with Steve. That's forefront of my mind. When I get that done, I'll take a few weeks or a month off, then go back to it. This character in this series has been rattling around in my head for a long time. I think Steve can attest to that. So I'll return to that and hopefully finish it fairly quickly, and then we'll see what happens with Luke Daniels.
When you say what happens with Luke Daniels, i.e., will there be a contract for more Luke Daniels books?
That's what we're hoping.
Okay.
That's what we're hoping, but we'll have to see. We all agreed we'd do 3 books, see how they do, and then we'd make an assessment at that point.
Sure.
Yeah, so Grant, so you've worked with James Rollins, you've worked with Clive Cussler, and Steve's by far the easiest and most satisfying experience, correct?
Well, yeah, it is the most satisfying experience, actually. Steve and I have known each other. So next October will be 20 years that we've known each other. And I think we were fans from early on. We didn't know it, but we met at BoucherCon, got to be friends, and we have very similar sensibilities about thrillers, and this collaboration has been very much a two-way street, and I've enjoyed it.
And Grant worked with Clancy too now. I mean, it was
that's where I first met Grant.
Number 1 New York Times bestseller with Clancy.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see, on YouTube, Kristen has a question, which is, I think it's for both of you. Was there ever an idea you had that you decided not to write about because it was too provocative or close to what was happening in the real world?
I don't
Well,
think so, not me.
what do you think? I
I,
think with this book, remember,
Yeah.
this book, we had to be careful not to get too close to the war in Ukraine.
right.
We didn't want to, we clearly indicate in the book there's something going on in Ukraine, but we don't actually call it a war. And we were careful about that. We had to be very careful because we had no idea what was going to happen down the road. But I don't think we've had anything. The main thing that came up was I wanted the library of Ivan the Terrible in this book, and we couldn't figure out a way to do it. And Grant's the one who came up with the way to incorporate it into the novel. He figured out a way to do it.
So that actually reminds me of the Amber Room where you and I first met and where this all started. You really like lost treasures, whether Russian or otherwise, but I didn't even know there was a lost library of Ivan the Terrible. How did you find out about it?
I read about it years ago. There's only a few people who ever saw it. There's a couple of accounts of people who saw it. We're not exactly sure what was in the library. There's no inventory. There was a few mentions of some manuscripts that were in there, but these would be one-of-a-kind manuscripts that we do not have any longer. So we really don't know what was in the library. We know that Ivan collected it. We know that it was given to him by his mother, who she brought it from basically Constantinople. She brought it with her when she came to marry Ivan the Great. And she brought the library with her as part of her diary. And then they added to the library during the life of her and then into Ivan the Terrible's lifetime. We know the library was there. We know it disappeared when Ivan died. But after that, we don't know much about it. And that's what was fun for me. I could have a lot of fun with that. We could do whatever we wanted to with it. And so we came up with an imaginative way to use it.
You know,
Well,
that's a
initially-
really interesting question. You might think if it came from Constantinople and that time that it would be Arabic, but because of the Russian Orthodox Church and the Byzantine Church, I'm wondering if those manuscripts might have been in Greek.
But they were, from what we know, there were Greek manuscripts, there were Arabic manuscripts, there were Latin manuscripts.
Right.
We know of those. We know some of them even so that the people who saw the library mentions, and we mentioned those in the book. Those that are mentioned in the book of what we were told by the eyewitnesses that was in there. But again, we have nothing specific, and we had to figure out a way. How do we use this library? How do we make it important? And Grant figured out a way. So Luke has to find not only the library, but one book in the library, and then he has to use that book to stop Red Star from falling.
Ah.
Mm-hmm.
Was there even a Russian written language by the time of Ivan the Terrible? I mean,
Yeah, there was a Cyrillic language, yes. Cyrillic
was?
there it existed, yes. And now I don't know if any manuscripts were in Cyrillic, but then they would have been Greek, Latin, that
Right. I
there.
know
But
Peter the Great's court, they spoke French. You know,
that
so
was much later. That was much later.
it was much later, but still, I didn't know for sure whether Russia had whether Cyrillic had actually sort of come in as a common language by the time of Ivan the Terrible.
It come in by with Peter the Great, but he wanted to make Russia more connected to Europe. So he made them use French. They dressed like the Europeans. They had the hairstyles and the facial hair of Europeans. He wanted them to be much more European, so he began to break with the old Russian traditions.
Mm-hmm.
Tom would like to know, Grant, he asks, how many research books did you read to flesh out the book, to inform the book?
I wouldn't say read. I skimmed a lot, went to a lot of different sites. You have to cross-reference to make sure that what you find on the internet is backed up by some different sources. But I've gotten better over the years at knowing what I need to know. When I was a much younger author, I would research something to death. And then the danger is you want to put everything you know in a book about the subject. But I think Steve would agree that you just get better at knowing what you need to know. So it helps to be able to narrow your focus like that.
Do things come kind of grinding to a halt if you like pack on too much of the detailed research?
Yeah, it gets the old dull. We're not writing an encyclopedia. We have to be careful about that. So we have to mix the information with action. Grant and I go through with that very carefully. And then when we're done, Elizabeth goes through with it too. She's a fresh eye that comes in. and can tell us. A lot of times, in fairness to us, her comments are more, you need a little more here. You need a little more here. You didn't give us quite enough here. Give us a little more. So, because we're pretty good about cutting stuff out. And so she usually says, you need a couple more sentences there, another sentence here, a little bit more.
Are you ever tempted to put your sources in the book, for anybody who wants to pursue things more closely?
We thought about it, and I thought about it with the Cotton Malone books, but I use so doggone many of the things. I mean, it's 300 to 400. When I do a Cotton Malone book, it's 300 to 400. So it's too much. It's too much. So I left it out.
And you avoid footnotes as well, which I appreciate because I still remember trying to read The Name of the Rose. When you tried to deal with the footnotes, so all the rest of it completely interrupted the reading.
Oh, yeah, I have no idea how a footnote would fit into fiction, because does your brain think in footnotes, or whatever? Yeah. So no, footnotes have no place in fiction, none whatsoever. Put it in the back like we did.
Oh.
That's about it really for questions.
All right. Anything you two would like to say to your readers?
No, we'd just like for you to go out and give the book a try and get to know Luke Daniels. If you like this one, then The Ninth Man's out there as well. And then Luke is also in the Cotton Malone series. He comes in and out of the Cotton Malone series as well. So give the books a try. They're in stores now in all formats,
They are. And we have autographed copies, which is even neater. Let me close by asking Steve, since February is your normal publication date for Cotton, where are we going this February? Can you tell us?
February 11th, we're going to Tuscany. And it's called The Medici Return. It deals with the Medici family from Florence, the Palio from Siena, the great horse races in the novel. It deals with Cotton gets caught up in quite a mystery and quite an adventure that goes back to the Medici in the Middle Ages. So it was fun. I went there last summer. I saw the Palio and summer before last. I went there 2 summers ago and got to see it all basically. And the novel came to me while I was there. So he'll be out next year.
Wonderful. Well, we'll look forward to it February 11th already. Mark your calendars. Thank you very much, guys. It was really a pleasure to see you both. And thank you all for joining us, virtual audience. And I agree with Steve. Rush out and buy it. It's not too late to get a copy for Father's Day, which is Sunday. Right. So this could be an excellent book. If you're struggling to find a gift for Dad, look no further, right?
That's right. You can go to your website or you can go to my website, steveberry.org, and you get right back to your website to get that signed copy.
We can, and we still have some left, so it's not too late. Anyway, thanks very much.